True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick. Your favorite podcasts and TV shows make life more entertaining. Now, exclusively for our podcast listeners, Mattress Firm is offering 10% off their already low prices, so you can listen to and watch your favorite entertainment from the comfiest, coziest spot there is, your bed. They also offer red carpet delivery, so you can stay on your old bed until they come and remove it to set up your new one.
That is right up my alley.
Don't have to move, hardly. Head to mattressfirm.com/podcast right now and save 10% with the code podcast10.
Back in 1999, Isaac Grimes was a freshman at Palmer Springs High School in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He was a quiet kid who liked to read and didn't have many friends. But early that year, he met a charismatic high school senior named Simon Sue. They shared an interest in chess and video games, and Simon took the younger, nerdy Isaac under his wing. Simon asked Isaac to join his club, which he called the O.A.R.A, the Operations and Reconnaissance Agents. For a young boy desperate to fit in with others, hanging out with Simon and being invited to join his club was irresistible. But the club moved on from harmless activities, like chess, to plotting a triple murder. Simon took Isaac and classmate Jonathan Matheny to a local range to practice shooting weapons. Then he ordered them to kill Isaac's former best friend, Tony Dutcher, and his grandparents in cold blood. Tony, Carl, and Joanne Dutcher were all murdered on New Year's Eve 2000, but as details emerged, the truth about the suspects and the motives were unclear. Did Simon Sue brainwash the two younger teenagers, or were all of the boys equally responsible? That's what we'll talk about.
It's a good topic.
Yeah, lots to talk about with it.
There is. So for a beer, I got a nice Colorado beer brewed in Fort Collins, Colorado. It's Odell's IPA by Odell Brewing Company. So I've had a few of these since we've moved here because they sell a lot of Odells down here in New Mexico. Pretty nice beer. Good brewery.
Good.
So their IPA is an amber-colored beer, nice white head, some very beautiful lacing. Nice to look at. Great aroma of citrus and some sweet malt. And the taste performs perfectly. Grapefruit, some orange, all over a base of caramel malt. Very nice. Medium bodied, easy to drink. 7% alcohol by volume, so maybe not something you're going to drink a bunch of all at once, but within reason.
Sure.
Good beer.
Well, it's going along well with your pain medicine, isn't it?
Seems to be.
So Dick broke his foot yesterday out walking the dogs and was nearly attacked by 3 wild dogs, or 3 dogs on the loose. They did have collars, right?
They did. I think they had escaped from someplace. But they were coming towards our dogs, and our dogs obviously were interested. So I was trying to get them to behave and get the other dogs chased away, and I stepped off the curb, I guess, the wrong way.
Ouch.
And it hurt. But then I figured, okay, I just twisted the ankle a little bit. It's fine.
Right, yeah.
Except I didn't sleep last night. It hurt so much.
Yeah, none of us did, Dick.
No, I know that.
Okay.
I'm such a good patient, aren't I?
Yeah.
So I go to the ER this morning and find out I broke a bone in the foot and I'm wearing a boot. So right now I have my foot up on a bar stool at the quiet end.
Sure.
Getting some ice and taking my pain meds. So if I start sounding a little weird, blame it on the beer and the pain med.
Well, yeah. We'll keep an eye on you. We'll keep you safe.
Keep me upright.
Okay, let's open up this beer.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to let you start our story while you're still very alert.
Okay. We'll see how I do at the end. So Isaac Grimes and Tony Dutcher had been best friends in junior high, but their friendship ended in their first year of high school. And this is after Isaac began hanging around a senior named Simon Sue. Isaac's sister, Liz, age 18, hated Simon, who was her classmate. She thought he was a freak. In a forensic class, Simon had bragged about how his godfather had taught him how to break and enter and how to be a sniper. She also believed that Simon and his friend John Matheny had slid her car tires one night when she was visiting a friend. So she's not real excited about Simon.
No, I don't think she wanted Isaac hanging out with this guy.
No, he's trouble.
It would turn out that he really was.
Certainly did. Now, Liz had confronted Isaac about her tires, which cost her $300 to replace, and she had paid to replace them with her own paychecks. Their father was out of work with a back injury, and their mother was struggling to pay the bills. Both Isaac and Liz had to earn their own spending money. They also had 2 younger brothers, who they spent hours babysitting. So a little bit of stress in this family, huh?
A lot of stress. It really seems like they were having a tough time.
Yeah. Anytime you're starting to depend on your kids to support the family financially, it's probably not a good thing.
No, it's got to be really tough. Now, back at Horace Mann Junior High School, Isaac and Tony Dutcher had been inseparable. They dressed in camouflage, they played military games, and they planned their futures. They were going to be special agents. Every day at lunch, no matter how cold it was, Tony and Isaac ate outside the cafeteria door. This was their way of toughening themselves up. They shared their collections of military patches and pins with each other. Isaac's granddad was retired from the Air Force, and Tony's was a Vietnam veteran. Isaac's mom made him stop wearing camouflage and talking about weapons at school during the 8th grade when the shootings at Columbine happened, and that was just 60 miles away from them. It was April 20th, 1999, if you remember, when Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold killed 12 students and a teacher. Then they turned their guns on themselves. They'd also built bombs in Klebold's garage, and fortunately these failed to detonate, or a lot of more people would have been killed. So for months after Columbine, boys like Isaac and Tony were viewed as potential terrorists. By the time Tony and Isaac entered high school, Palmer had ramped up security. Over the summer between junior high and high school, Isaac babysat his brothers, he mowed lawns, and he helped out at Vacation Bible School. So he seemed like a really nice kid. Liz, his older sister, had told him about high school and how crowded it was and how you had to find your classes, and the idea of it scared Isaac, who was socially awkward. He was in Latin class with Tony, but Tony had a new best friend, he would find out. So he felt lonely like an outsider, and that's until he was approached by Simon Sue.
Yeah, Simon's a couple years older than Isaac, but they were in the same Latin class. And there are some schools that still teach Latin, huh?
Well, they did at least then.
Yeah.
This was still a while ago.
That's right. So Simon asked Isaac if he liked to play chess. Well, as a matter of fact, Isaac loved chess. He had played with his 6th grade teacher, Mr. Lowell, until the teacher died of a heart attack about a year earlier. He was only 32 when he died. And this happened right after Isaac's grandfather died. So he was kind of hit extra hard. 2 doses of grief.
He's going through a lot for a young kid.
He is. So Simon was known as one of the best chess players in the school. So Isaac was really excited to play with him. But their weekly chess games lasted only for about a month. Simon had other interests he began to share with Isaac. He began teaching Isaac about the political situation in Guyana, the small South American country where Simon's extended family lived.
And as we all know, probably, this is also where Jim Jones, that tragedy happened. With the People's Temple, was it called?
I believe it was called that.
Yeah.
So there's some history there, too.
Sure.
Isaac was impressed with everything Simon knew about the military history of the country. He was even more impressed when Simon told him that he was a secret agent in a paramilitary organization. The O.A.R.A, Operations and Reconnaissance Agents, were ready to serve if a coup should arise against the Guyanese government, which is the People's Progressive Party.
Simon showed Isaac and another student, Jonathan Matheny, photos of himself dressed in military uniforms. He also showed them videos of his father's home in Guyana. His father had Guyanese coins and an extensive gun collection. Isaac had seen his grandfather's hunting rifle, But Simon's father, Keith Sue, had a collection of semi-automatic and automatic weapons, also machine guns and AK-47s. So this wasn't like anything he'd seen before.
No, he was well armed, wasn't he?
Crazy. Now, Keith Sue would say that he was a collector and he made money off of these guns, which could be valid. But me, personally, I don't know if that's a great thing for a kid to see in his house. Of course, that's just my opinion. Isaac soon pledged his allegiance to the O.A.R.A., and he promised to serve under Simon as the group's intelligence officer. So this was flattering, telling him he'd be the intelligence officer. So instead of playing chess, most Wednesdays were spent assembling and disassembling weapons or shooting guns at the public gun range, and John was usually with them. After John turned 16, he drove them wherever they needed to go. So at first it was fun being a soldier in Simon's small army. Then Simon told Isaac to help John in a robbery, which he called a raid. The target was the home of Gabe Melchor, a Palmer student who had been Simon's friend until their relationship soured. The purpose of the raid was to steal guns that would become part of the O.A.R.A. stash. Isaac was scared and he tried to make excuses for why he couldn't participate, but that really enraged Simon. Simon told Isaac that he was in too deep to turn back. He no longer was allowed to make his own decisions. So Isaac signed an oath to follow orders, and he did as he was told.
Yes, he did. Then over the summer, between Isaac's freshman and sophomore years, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel in the O.A.R.A. He was required to type up expense reports and turn over all his money to Simon. So he worked at Carl's Jr. fast food restaurant, and he also babysat his little brothers. On a report typed up that July, Isaac noted that he had been issued 5 weapons, including an assault rifle and a bag of pocket knives. The report noted that the knives had been seized from the home of another former friend of Simon's. This was a kid named Darren Dodge.
So it seems like these raids that Simon Sue was setting up were just kind of personal vendettas.
So far, doesn't it?
And robberies, of course.
Yeah. These are people that used to be friends. Maybe they were also in his paramilitary organization or something.
Or refused to join.
Or refused to join or quit, something.
Sure.
But they aroused the wrath of Simon.
Mm-hmm. Isaac's parents didn't know anything about the weapons. He kept them hidden in his room. While Simon was away on vacation with his family in Guyana, Isaac became careless with the group's money. So Simon returned and told Isaac that he owed him $2,000 for the O.A.R.A., and this was a lot more than what Isaac had spent. But he really couldn't argue. He's in this position where he's supposed to do as he's told. And then he was also put on probation. In the fall of his sophomore year, Isaac was still on probation, and his weapons had been taken away. At the same time, John had been promoted, so there's kind of a shift in power here. Simon was angry at Isaac, and he criticized him for being the weakest member of the group.
Yeah, so he's gone from kind of like second in command in this group to being the low man on the totem pole.
Yeah, but it almost seems like this Simon knows some psychology, the way he's working this.
He is.
So he must have been intelligent.
Well, I think he knew how to work these kids.
Absolutely, yeah. In mid-December, Simon went with his dad to visit his uncle's house in Canada, and John was left in charge, and Isaac had to make him aware of his whereabouts at all times. John was given specific orders that a raid was to be made on Tony Dutcher's grandfather, Carl Dutcher. For months, John and Simon had told Isaac that they knew his mother's route home from work, and if he tried anything and didn't follow orders, John would kill his mother.
Yeah, so here he is. He's been demoted under scrutiny by his comrades, right?
Yeah.
And they're threatening him. So, you better do what we tell you to do, otherwise we know where to find your family. We're going to go after your mother.
And let's remember, this is a 15-year-old.
Right.
Yeah.
Who is already kind of into this stuff anyway, even before he met Simon.
Oh, yes. Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much into wanting to be in the military and be an agent. A lot of fantasizing about that sort of thing.
So Isaac was given the plan for the New Year's Eve raid. This was when it was going to be taking place. That day he would work as usual until 5 at Carl's Jr. John would drive him to work and would pick him up afterwards. Isaac was going to tell his parents that he was having New Year's Eve dinner with Simon's uncle, Lennox Sue. After work, he and John would call Simon in Toronto for instructions, then load up his car and drive to the Dutcher house.
Now, a few nights earlier, John had driven with Isaac to plot a route to the Dutcher's trailer home and to case out the place. At that point, Isaac had pretended to forget the way there, saying that the roads were too dark and confusing. But this proved to make Simon angrier, and he was reprimanded over the phone for this. Isaac, of course, did know the way. In November, Isaac had given directions to Keith Sue, Simon's dad, as he drove him to the Dutcher house to pick up his hunting rifle, which Tony had stored there for him. Tony and Isaac had been planning a hunting trip together before their friendship kind of fell apart.
Simon had interrogated Isaac about Carl Dutcher and his views.
Yeah, back in November.
Isaac had told him that he had bad memories of Vietnam, and he didn't like Oriental people. Simon had not liked that, and he said that he'd heard Tony Dutcher's father and uncle were drug dealers. He was very critical of the family, and said that Carl had probably raped Vietnamese women when he was over there during the war.
So it seems at this point he just really hooked into the Dutchers and was throwing all his hate in that direction.
Right.
And started plotting this.
He's going to take care of them.
So Isaac was ordered by Simon to design the raid for the Dutchers. And first Isaac presented a botched plan, hoping that Simon would change his mind. But when Simon saw that plan, he yelled at Isaac and he hit him. "You're lucky," he told Isaac. "We were going to take you over to John's and shoot you." So now he's threatening his life, as well as his mother's.
That's right.
The second plan, which was designed by Isaac and approved by Simon, was to go to the Dutchers with John, or risk being killed and having his family killed. Simon showed Isaac the sniper hiding places he'd staked out in his front yard, where he could easily shoot Isaac's sister Liz, his little brothers, and his parents.
So on New Year's Eve, it was 1:30 in the afternoon when John pulled up in Isaac's driveway. He was on his way to work. John was going to drop him off and pick him up when work was done. Isaac's mother, Donna Grimes, got home from work around midnight on New Year's Eve, and Isaac wasn't home. She woke Isaac's father, Rob, who told her that he had not heard from Isaac, but Tony had called earlier wanting to know when Isaac would be coming to his grandparents' house. He seemed to be waiting for him, or at least under the impression that Isaac was going to be coming to his place.
Which didn't make sense. Donna knew that Isaac was no longer close friends with Tony, and she also knew that he had left for work that day with John Matheny. So no one from Carl's Jr. had called, so she knew he must have showed up for work that day.
So around 9 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day, Isaac arrived home with John. He claimed that he and John had visited their friend Glenn Urban after work at Carl's and then spent the night at John's, because his mother is pissed.
And worried, very worried.
No, she hadn't heard from him.
This woman has got a lot on her plate already, before all this awful stuff even happens. Isaac was pale and disheveled, and he apologized to his mom for worrying her. And Donna asked him why Tony was expecting him at his grandparents' the night before. But Isaac just avoided answering that question.
Yeah, he didn't know about the phone calls from Tony to his house.
No. So Donna, she's working, her husband's unemployed and in constant pain, and she's trying to get some kind of normalcy for her children. But whatever hopes she had for that new year of 2001 would be crushed.
Yes, so who is this guy Simon Sue?
Yeah, let's talk a little about the guy behind everything.
Whether you're thinking he's the mastermind who brainwashed these kids or just happened to pick on two vulnerable youths, whatever. He was just a little guy.
He was tiny, really, for a 19-year-old guy.
5 feet tall, weighed about 100 pounds. He was handsome, though, like his older brothers, Kevin and Marlon. One who was a Marine, the other one was planning to go to law school. Simon was close to his mother, Nadia, and she believed he was special, not like her other sons in many ways. He was funny and quirky. And he didn't have a driver's license, but he had John Matheny to drive him around wherever he wanted to go. And he still liked to help his mother cook her curry dishes. Now he was close to his father also, but in a different way. Keith, his father, was not affectionate and could be pretty tough on his kids, but he taught Simon the importance of making money. He was a gun collector, and he taught Simon about the resale value of guns. He was also small like Simon, but very muscular. And one of his hobbies was working on car engines in their backyard.
Yeah, maybe even a little bit more than a hobby because he was constantly fixing cars and he had a yard full. So it was another way to make money. But Simon was quite charismatic and usually the leader in any group of friends that he was in. He had a hard time reading and paying attention in his classes. One day in kindergarten, he was sent home because he brought a real machete for show and tell. How horrific would that be?
Yeah.
When the principal called his parents, though, they explained that it had been a gift from Guyana and he was very proud of it.
And after all, he is just a kindergartner.
Well, just the idea that he has access to it is what would horrify me.
Right.
How did this kindergartner get his hands on it?
Well, it's just sitting there in the house.
At the very least, he could chop his little fingers off. It's terrible.
Then there was another time in elementary school when Simon took a classmate home and showed her his father's gun collection. And she later told friends that Simon had told her she'd better learn to sleep with her eyes open. It seemed like he was kidding, but it certainly made her uncomfortable.
I would imagine. But more than anything, Simon was really proud of his heritage. His parents had immigrated to the U.S. from Guyana before he was born. He enjoyed chess, and he was one of the best players at the school. He often beat chess club champions from other schools, and he also taught younger kids at the community center how to play. But nothing interested him more than the violence. Whether it was random or organized, according to his friends, the things on Simon's mind the most were terrorism, revolutions, weapons, and power. And despite his small stature, he was considered to be a badass. People watched themselves around him.
Almost like he could explode at any time, huh?
Seems like it.
Yeah. So in his senior year, again, he's older than the other kids, Simon spent his afternoons with Isaac Grimes, John Matheny, and Glenn Urban. He had gotten to know these kids in school, and he knew their skills and weaknesses. Simon had recruited each of them to the O.A.R.A., telling them that his father had been a top agent who had retired from the organization. According to Simon, the O.A.R.A. was developed to root out drug dealers, do various good missions, and support the People's Progressive Party of Guyana. The O.A.R.A., he told them, had to be kept secret from parents and anyone who might get in their way.
Well, sure. In Guyana, Simon explained, his father was a close friend of the president. His mother was a member of a very influential family, too. So a coup could occur at any time in Guyana and destabilize the country, and when that happened, they would be called into action. So he said they had to be ready. And he also told the boys that when they left the U.S. and entered Guyana, they would each have a beautiful Guyanan wife. So Simon said that he was already engaged to this gorgeous young woman who had pledged her virginity to him. They had become engaged over the summer when he visited there. So this kind of reminds you of Islamic terrorists and the virgins in heaven.
Right.
Right? Brings that to mind a little bit.
Does. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Now, Simon claimed to hate racists. Even at the same time, he frequently complained about the black people messing up life in Guyana. Racists had picked on him when he was in elementary school, or so he said.
Well, I believe they might have. He was a little different looking.
He could have been, sure, and he was small.
Yeah.
So during the final weeks of the year 2000, Simon had been focused on the Dutchers, who he saw as racist drug dealers. Everything he hated. When he packed up to go to Canada with his father, he took along an international telephone calling card in his wallet. He could control John and Isaac from Toronto, 1,000 miles away.
So like I said, John was second in command, and he was also Simon's driver. And he really enjoyed being in charge when Simon went away. He was a very serious boy. He had a military haircut and a little bit chubby around the face. His mom, Bonnie, was becoming more insistent that he start spending more time at home, so she had some concerns about him. His seriousness and his extra polite behavior toward her made her uneasy. Didn't seem normal. Besides driving Simon around, John drove Isaac to and from work, and this kept him away from home a lot, and Bonnie wanted their Christmas to be more like it used to be, back when John was a happy little boy. And back then he liked to read or watch movies with his sister. But John, he'd built up a lot of anger for his father. Ed Matheny and Bonnie had divorced a year earlier, but they still lived in the same house. Bonnie worked for years at a steady job, but Ed was floundering, and Bonnie was the main financial supporter of the family. So John saw his dad as weak and dependent, and this enraged him. He preferred to stay away from home as much as he could. But John had also had a tough time in school. In the 9th grade, a doctor had prescribed antidepressant medication, and John refused to take it. He broke off from all of his junior high friends, and then he met Simon Sue in his sophomore year. He became a regular at the Sue house, eating meals cooked by Mrs. Sue and working on car engines with Mr. Sue. Now to John, this felt like an orderly place and gave him some comfort. The O.A.R.A. gave him a purpose and a sense of responsibility.
Yeah, and I can see that. I mean, his own home life is not great, and he's at Simon's house, and that seems to be a more stable family.
Well, yes, and if we're seeing Simon as the manipulator here, he can pick out the kids who need this kind of structure and are going to do what he wants.
You're right.
He's picking on vulnerable kids. Now, whether they're at fault or not, we'll get into, or how much fault they hold, but he definitely seems to be picking the kids that are vulnerable.
He certainly was.
Yeah.
So Glenn Urban had joined the O.A.R.A. in the fall of 2000. Glenn was a nervous kid who hated school, but he was good with tools and he could build or fix just about anything. So Simon asked him if he would be interested in doing a job for him, and Glenn said sure. Glenn lived with his mom and his younger brother in a neighborhood near Palmer, where he spent most of his time in the backyard garage, where he had put together a workshop. Now, his parents had divorced when he was younger, and he rarely saw his father. He smoked cigarettes once in a while, but was not into drugs or alcohol. So, driven by John, Simon and Glenn rode around town one lunch hour, and Simon told Glenn his spiel about the O.A.R.A. Glenn was intrigued, even though he was skeptical. Now, he was impressed with Simon's knowledge of weapon systems, jet engines, geopolitics, and terrorism. When Simon befriended him and told him he could get him power tools for his workshop, Glenn was excited. So after Glenn signed on with the O.A.R.A., Simon gave him a new titanium drill bit set.
So Simon's almost like a Jim Jones in training.
Simon knows exactly how to work these kids, doesn't he?
He really seemed to, yeah. Glenn started out doing odd jobs for Simon, and his workshop received more high-quality tools from him. He didn't see John or Isaac much over Christmas, and he spent New Year's Eve with his other friend, Anthony. So it seems like Glenn was a little bit more on the outside. He wasn't really in it like the other three.
No, he was kind of the odd job guy. He'd fix things, repair things for them.
Sure.
Or for Simon, and he'd get some new tools.
Right, which was a big deal for him. So on the afternoon of December 31st, 2000, John left his house and drove to Isaac's to pick him up, and he dropped him off at Carl's Jr. At about 5 p.m., John called his mom and told her he was having dinner with Simon's uncle, Lennox Sue. As he waited for Isaac's shift to end, he talked to Simon, who confirmed that their New Year's Eve plans to kill the Dutchers were still on. On January 3rd, 2001, Carl and Joanna Dutcher were found. They were shot to death inside their trailer home in Guffey, which was a couple of hours away from Colorado Springs. Up the hill from the home, on a rocky overlook, their grandson Tony was dead in his sleeping bag, and his throat was cut all the way through to his spine. Investigators determined that they'd been lying frozen there for 3 days. They'd been murdered sometime between New Year's Eve afternoon and New Year's Day sunrise. Carl Dutcher's son James in Colorado Springs had called the sheriff's office early on January 3rd, asking an officer to do a check on his parents. The phone had been ringing and no one had been answering. Deputies knew that Carl Dutcher was a military veteran and a gun collector, and he was also a licensed arms dealer. He and Joanna had moved to Guffey back in 1991 after Carl retired from his government service job in Colorado Springs. Joanna worked part-time at a store that was about 20 miles away from there, and she was well liked by her co-workers. Now, Carl and Joanna, they'd known each other since they were children in Kansas, and they were married back in 1964. Carl had served 3 tours in Vietnam, while Joanna raised their 3 sons. They'd moved to this rural spot to enjoy peace and quiet, but it hadn't been easy. Their youngest son, Ty, had been convicted of drug possession, robbery, and numerous traffic violations. Middle son, James, had done jail time and spent time in the state mental hospital, and eldest son, Charles, had been arrested several times, and he'd spent 2 years in prison for a drug charge back in the 90s. So the son, James, is the one that called, wanting someone to check on them. And he told the dispatcher when he called that Charles' son, Tony, was spending the Christmas holiday with them, and no one had heard from the boy either.
Right, so we've got grandparents and a grandson. No one's known what's going on with them. Deputy Henry Hassler was dispatched to the scene just past noon on January 3rd. When he arrived, he saw a small white pickup parked outside. He ran the plates and confirmed that it belonged to the Dutchers. No one answered when he knocked on the trailer door, and the window shades were drawn. Hassler called his dispatcher and asked for backup, because he knew that Joanna and Carl didn't take vacations. So he's worried already. Car's there, no answer at the door.
Right, bad feeling all around.
Security officer for the area, Clay Briggs, drove in from just a mile away. He and Hassler found the back door unlocked, and they entered through the tiny kitchen. Immediately, they saw feet sticking out from the hallway. Then they saw Carl in a blue and white bathrobe sprawled across the floor. His skin was gray. Through the first door on the right, Hassler saw Joanna in a floral print nightgown. Her feet were surrounded by a large puddle of blood, and she sat wedged against the bathtub. Both Carl and Joanna had obviously been dead for quite some time. They also searched the house for Tony, but only found the Dutcher's toy poodle cowering behind the sofa. So Hassler called dispatch for more backup, because they've just discovered 2 dead bodies.
Sure.
And they taped off the home, the crime scene. So 2 investigators arrived and climbed up the rocky mountainside to Tony's camp. This was a dugout fort with short log walls and a tarp cover. Inside, Tony was laying face down in a military-style sleeping bag. Blood was pooled around his frozen head, and there was blood spatter on a rolled-up sleeping bag just a few feet away. Tony's body was turned over, and the sleeping bag was unzipped. The boy's shoes were sitting near his head, and his feet were wrapped with blankets. A long cut beneath his chin opened into a large dark hole. His hands were frozen, as if they'd been reaching for his neck with his palms on his chest.
So, of course, this was a scary event for the whole community, and a crowd gathered outside of the property that evening. The bodies were secured overnight to be processed the next morning, so officers had to take shifts watching over the bodies. The families had to be notified that Carl, Joanna, and Tony had probably been dead since New Year's Eve, or early New Year's Day. Jenny Vadrasar, Tony's mom, had been taking a nap before heading to work at 10 p.m. when she received a call from Tony's Uncle James telling her that something was wrong up at the Dutcher's home. So she called her sister, Kathy Creech, and asked her to drive her up the mountain from Colorado Springs to the police station. She had called Fabulous TNTs, the club where she worked as an exotic dancer, and told them she wouldn't be in that night. So Jenny's got a rough life going on too. Jenny had given Tony a new watch with yellow and orange lightning bolts on the band for Christmas, even though he'd spent a lot of the holiday with his dad, Charles Dutcher. Tony hadn't been living with her, and he was usually mad at her, and she was too exhausted to deal with it most of the time. But giving him Christmas gifts a week ago had really been nice for her. They'd gotten along easily, and she'd showered him with affection, and it was a happy time. Jenny had been a stripper since she was 19 when Tony was only 2, and she had left Colorado Springs for a movie career in California. Then she met Paul Vandrasar, and they were married. They returned to Colorado Springs when Tony was about 10 to be near Jenny's family, and so Tony could have a relationship with his grandparents, Carl and Joanna. Charles, Tony's dad, had been getting his life together, and he also wanted to have a relationship with Tony. But about a year earlier, in the beginning of 2000, Paul had begun acting strangely. He became irrational and paranoid, and he was diagnosed as bipolar and given medications, but nothing seemed to work. Jenny became afraid of Paul, and she moved out, and of course she took Tony with her. But Tony had bonded with his stepdad and he didn't want to leave him. But Jenny insisted. Then the next day, Paul hung himself. So Jenny grieved for Paul, but Tony blamed her. So since then, there'd been a lot of friction between the mother and son. When Jenny last talked to her son, it was New Year's Eve, and he sounded excited. He said his old friend Isaac Grimes was coming to spend the night up there at the camp with him. He said that Isaac would be coming by her house to pick up a sleeping bag. Now, Isaac never showed up, but Jenny didn't think too much about that. She was just happy that Tony seemed like he was excited to have his old friend back. So Kathy and Jenny, after being called by the police, stopped to pick up James Dutcher on their way to the station. A detective took Jenny into a private room where he told her that Tony had been killed. She fell apart, of course, crying, and a woman from the victim's advocate's office put a blanket over her shoulders and tried to soothe her. Her sister came in, and the two women held Jenny as she cried. Tony's father, Charles, was at work in the kitchen of a place called the Blue Star when he got a call from police. Now, he had camped with Tony on the previous New Year's Eve, and he was supposed to the night that Tony was killed, but he couldn't make it because he had to work. He'd called Tony to apologize, but Tony sounded okay with it. He said he was camping anyway. Charles had planned to make it up to him, but now, of course, he'd never have a chance to do that.
This would be a good time to take a short break for our sponsors.
Sounds good, because this episode is sponsored by ADT. ADT can design and install a smart home just for you, and it's backed by 24/7 protection. ADT has doorman service, which is ADT automation that unlocks doors for package deliveries, friends, or if your kid forgets his key. Another really cool service of ADT smart homes is turn down service. This is ADT automation that arms your security system, locks your doors, and even turns down your lights and thermostats. They really think of everything.
ADT even offers worry-free getaway service, which lets you arm your system, lock up, and set lighting schedules before you go on vacation. And this is all controlled from the ADT app or by the sound of your voice, and is backed by ADT's 24/7 protection. Best of all, with ADT, you don't have to worry about installing and configuring your system. ADT will do it for you. DIFY, as we say.
Okay. Well, if this sounds good to you, just visit adt.com/smart to learn more about how ADT can design and install a secure smart home just for you.
Now, we also have support for this episode provided by RxBar. RxBar wants to build things the right way. They believe in the power of transparency, and they let all of the core ingredients do their talking, with all of them listed on the front of the package. Whether you like sweet or savory, chocolate or fruit, there's an RxBar for you. And they have no artificial colors, flavors, fillers, or preservatives.
Well, RX bars are really great for any number of occasions I can think of, including breakfast on the go, an office snack to get you through the afternoon, or a pre- or post-workout snack. They come in 14 delicious flavors, including mango pineapple, chocolate hazelnut, peanut butter, and berries. Now that one's like a mini PB&J sandwich, so that's really delicious. Chocolate sea salt and blueberry. They have seasonal flavors too, which is perfect if you're one of us who waits with bated breath for pumpkin spice latte season. Now, RxBar has debuted RX Nut Butter, which contains delicious creamy nut butter and gives you 9 grams of protein. Also, it comes in single-serve packs, so it's squeezable and spreadable. You can pair it up with fruit, rice cakes, pretzels, or you can just squeeze it into your mouth and eat it straight from the pouch. The nut butters come in 3 flavors: honey cinnamon peanut butter, and vanilla almond butter. Those nut butters are a great source of protein in the morning. When our grandkids visited last month, our picky eater, Jonah, wouldn't sit still long enough for me to make him breakfast. But he was just really happy to take a pouch of nut butter and pop it in his mouth as he bebopped around the yard with our dogs.
Not to take too much away from Jonah, but he's a terrible picky eater.
He is.
So just the fact that he would eat this stuff.
Anything he'll eat is a wonderful thing.
I would give RxBar extra kudos because they make something that the pickiest of all eaters, our grandson Jonah, enjoys.
There should be a little asterisk on the package, Jonah approved.
Right, I think so.
I think you could, yep.
So for 25% off your first order, visit rxbar.com/TCB and enter TCB at checkout.
All right. So, you know I love a good Netflix documentary, especially a series like Making a Murderer or The Staircase.
So what do you do when you've just finished watching a gripping Netflix documentary series or film and you're at a total loss for what's next?
Well, good news. Now there's You Can't Make This Up. It's a new podcast from Netflix that takes a look behind the scenes of the shows everyone's talking about. And this includes Making a Murderer. Now, I remember when I first watched it and I binged the whole thing in one day. This is the story of DNA exoneree Stephen Avery, who in the midst of exposing corruption in local law enforcement became the prime suspect in a grisly crime. Also, Wild Wild Country, the story of a sex cult that took over a small Oregon town back in the 80s.
And then there's Evil Genius, the crazy account of a pizza delivery man who robbed a bank with a bomb around his neck.
That is a crazy account.
It is. In each episode, journalists, podcasters, and comedians chat with show creators to get an exclusive look inside their process, explore stories they've left out, and find answers to burning questions. They also talk about twice-convicted Amanda Knox and the Academy Award-winning film Icarus.
Well, you know, I think every documentary should have its own podcast, so I think this is great. You Can't Make This Up is available on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, or your preferred podcast destination. Go listen, subscribe, and review now.
Let's get back to the story.
Let's do that.
Early on the morning of January 4th, deputies escorted Charles up the hill, where he identified Tony's body. If he had been there with Tony, as they had planned, his large mixed-breed dogs could have protected them. He felt that he had let his son down, and now his son and his parents were gone.
That's a huge tragedy, to lose a child and your parents.
Yeah, and imagine the guilt. I mean, he was going to be spending the night with him.
Oh, this will haunt him forever.
And he begged off because he had to work.
There's no amount of therapy that's going to get you totally over that, I don't think.
No. So in the kitchen, Charles and James Dutcher recognized their mother's plastic pill dispenser and saw that she had not taken them since midday New Year's Day. They speculated that when Carl got up in the middle of the night for a drink or to make coffee around 4 in the morning, as he usually did, the killer must have been waiting for him in the hallway. The killer must have known that Carl kept numerous guns in his bedroom.
Yeah, they're not going to go in there and get him.
Nope. So normally a rifle in a soft camouflage case was propped up in the corner of the living room. The case was still there, but the rifle was missing. His .45 revolver was also missing.
James and Charles were shocked when they saw the trashed bathroom where their mother's body had been found. The pipes beneath the tub had been destroyed by gunfire, and the toilet was in pieces. Not to mention all the blood. It was horrific. These are horrific deaths.
I mean, it was almost like they fired a machine gun or something into there, blasted away.
It was brutal. So the autopsies were completed the next week, and the victims' injuries were recorded. 6 bullets had struck Joanna as she hid in the bathroom, trying to hide behind the toilet. 1 entered her cheek and exited her neck. 1 hit her front right shoulder and tore apart the joint. 1 went through her forearm as she held it up defensively. 1 bullet hit her right finger, and the bullet that killed her went through her left breast and entered her liver, pancreas, and bowel, before ripping through her abdominal aorta and spine and exiting through her lower back. 2 bullets that entered Carl's chest and abdomen shattered 4 ribs and lacerated his bowel and aorta, cracking his upper spine. Tony's autopsy listed just 1 mortal wound, and this was the large, deep cut to his throat, beneath his chin from ear to ear. And there were no signs of a struggle in the case of Tony. Someone had snuck up on him, surprised him.
Yeah, the reconstruction was that they had approached from behind and got his exposed neck and just sliced.
Yeah, it was brutal.
It was. So in Colorado Springs, Tony's friend Nathan Hickman was interviewed. Now, he had last spoken to Tony 2 days after Christmas. Nathan had never been to Tony's grandparents' property, but he said that another friend, Isaac Grimes, had visited there before. Nathan remembered that Tony had been upset with Isaac about 2 years ago because he wasn't keeping up with the hard work that was required to maintain the fort that they had built.
Yeah, they'd built this fort together.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
So Tony also told Nathan that Isaac and Tony had collected military-type equipment. Tony had told him that Isaac owned lots of knives and a bayonet. But Tony and Isaac had not been getting along very well, most recently. But Tony and Isaac had not been getting along well recently.
Well, later that afternoon, the police got a call from Isaac's dad, Robin, and he said he might have information on the killings. It seemed that Isaac Grimes was a common link in their conversations about Tony. On Friday, January 5th, detectives arrived at the Grimes house, and Donna Grimes answered the door and walked them into their sparsely furnished living room. She introduced them to Robin and to Isaac, and 2 little boys, Isaac's younger brothers, were playing around in another room. Donna and Robin had known Tony since he was 12, and they were very distressed about this. Isaac, a gangly teenager, sat near his mother, and Isaac explained that he had been to the Dutcher's house several times in the past, but the last time he was there, he said, was in November, when he had come by to pick up his hunting rifle. Isaac said that the last time he saw Tony was at school before Christmas break, but they had called each other a few times over Christmas break. Around 2 p.m. on the 31st, Isaac had called Tony to wish him a Happy New Year, he said, and Tony had invited him up, but Isaac had told him he was too busy. Isaac admitted that they had not been getting along well over the past year, but he wouldn't say what had happened. Isaac was asked if he noticed any of Tony's watches, and Isaac said that he had seen a wristwatch with a leather band, and it was decorated with orange lightning bolts. Tony wasn't wearing it, but he was keeping it in his pocket. Now, Rob showed the detectives their caller ID box that showed 3 calls received at the Grimes home from Tony at 3:01 p.m., 6:23 p.m., and 7:24 p.m. Isaac's sister Liz had taken the first call and told Tony that Isaac was at work. Rob answered the other 2 calls, and he said that Tony had sounded manic. He said that he was expecting Isaac and he was worried about him because it was so hard to find the place in the dark. So I'm not sure about Rob Grimes. Was he suspecting his own son, or did he just think these calls were important in finding the killer?
Well, that's a tough one for me.
Yeah.
I kind of think he suspected his son had something to do with it.
Yeah, maybe that his son just knew something?
Yeah.
Yeah. It does seem that way.
Because there's a lot of stuff that looks like Tony is expecting him.
Yes, and really Isaac doesn't have a acceptable explanation for that in his parents' eyes.
No, he was hanging out with his friend John.
Right.
They're each other's alibi.
And that's it.
That's it. So Isaac denied planning to go up to the Dutchers on New Year's Eve. He said that he and his friend John Matheny, who had picked him up after work, had gone to their friend Glenn Urban's house, and there had hung out in his garage for a few hours. Afterwards, he'd spent the night at John's house. Isaac said he got home by 9 the next morning and spent the day with his family. This is New Year's Day.
Yeah, so police left and Isaac went to his room. And when Rob checked in on him later, Isaac asked his dad if he would fit a pipe in the window because the lock was broken. So you know how you can prop a pipe up, right, to hold the window from opening.
Right.
And Rob thought, well, that's reasonable. I mean, Isaac had reason to be afraid. His friend had just been murdered. It makes sense that he would be scared.
Yeah, I think so.
Detectives asked Tony's mom, Jenny, what she thought of Isaac, and she said that she knew the boys hadn't spoken for over a year. But then Tony had told her on the 31st that Isaac would be stopping by her house for the sleeping bag, and he never came by. They asked her again about what Tony had received for Christmas, and she told them about the wristwatch. When detectives interviewed James Dutcher, he told them that he had spoken to Tony on New Year's Eve, and at the time Joanna was making chili for him in the kitchen, and Tony sounded happy. And James said that Isaac was there for a sleepover when he talked to Tony. So now someone's placing Isaac at the scene.
So now he might have actually been there, despite what everyone else is saying.
Absolutely, yep.
So on March 1st, Colorado Bureau of Investigation agent Steve Sadar and the DA investigator Leonard Post met with Rob, Donna, and Isaac Grimes at the Colorado Springs police station. Interviews over the past several weeks with Tony's friends and family had implicated Isaac, whom Tony had called repeatedly over the holiday weekend, asking if he was coming for a sleepover. Isaac's friends had backed up his alibi for the night of the murders, but it was certainly not an airtight alibi. No one could account for Isaac's whereabouts from 5 in the afternoon to 9 the next morning.
Well, one important detail was that Isaac had mentioned Tony's watch. This is huge. The one with the lightning bolts? Because they knew that Jenny had given her son the watch for Christmas, just before he left to camp up at his grandparents' place. If Isaac had seen this watch, he must have seen Tony after Christmas. But Isaac claimed that he hadn't seen Tony or been up to the Dutchers at all over the holiday. So now they've pretty much caught him in a lie. So in this interview with his parents there, Isaac said that Tony had shown him the watch sometime before school was out for the holiday. He said that he and Tony had talked about having him over to his grandparents' place, but Isaac had told Tony that he already had plans to go to Simon Sue's uncle's house for dinner. Isaac said again that he had spent the night at John's house, and he said that John snuck him in, so there were no witnesses that he was there.
Right, it's just his and John's words.
Yeah, it's down to these two.
Donna Grimes said she had called Simon's cousin's house and found out that Isaac wasn't there. So the investigators wanted to know more about why Tony was calling looking for him that night. Something had led Tony to believe that Isaac was coming up to see him.
Right, and Isaac does not have an adequate explanation.
He does not.
So Investigator Post explained that Tony's camp looked like he had been waiting for someone to camp with him. He had brought a Scrabble game, some extra clothing, and sleeping bags, like he was waiting for someone. When Isaac didn't respond to this, Post told him that Tony hadn't received that watch until Christmas, after the time when Isaac claimed to last have seen him. So Isaac finally did confess. He started out by explaining the politics of Guyana and his involvement with a secret organization called the O.A.R.A. The Dutchers were chosen as targets because Simon thought they were racists and drug dealers. Now at first he claimed that John killed all 3 victims. Then Post confronted him with evidence of a coat that was found with Tony's blood all over it. So Isaac confessed that he cut Tony's throat by coming up behind him in the fort while Tony was sitting up. And then when he had gone down to the trailer, he had witnessed John shooting Carl and Joanna Dutcher in the trailer. And that was early in the morning, like 3 or 4 in the morning. According to Isaac, he had been on probation in the O.A.R.A., and he believed if he didn't follow through by participating in the murders, he and his family would be killed. He said he had considered suicide, but then he was told that his family would be killed if he took his own life. So Isaac was taken to the Spring Creek Juvenile Detention Center downtown, and Donna and Rob returned home. And they were given instructions not to talk to anyone about what they knew. Now that night, Donna answered the phone 4 times, and each time it was Simon Sue calling and asking for Isaac. And each time she just told him that Isaac wasn't home. But she was fuming. She knew he was behind this.
Oh, absolutely. So the next day, Simon Sue's home was searched. His mother, Nadia Sue, sat nervously in the living room as the search was conducted, and Simon sat beside her. Officers found a box of gold Guyana coins and an academic planner from Palmer High School, with a page in the back where Simon had notes on payments made to him from Isaac Grimes. The page was titled, Probation to the O.A.R.A. 2 of Simon's knives were confiscated, along with a loaded assault rifle and 36 other guns. Quite an arsenal.
It's crazy.
Simon was told to get ready to come to the police station, and he agreed cheerfully. He said he would love to ride in a police car.
So what's up with this? I mean, he seemed like he didn't think he was going to get in trouble.
It sure sounds that way.
Did he have some idea in his head because he physically didn't do it that he was immune from prosecution?
I'm sure he did.
Yeah, it seems like it. So next, the search moved to another house where Keith Sue, Simon's dad, worked and stored various merchandise. He greeted the officers and they followed him inside, and the house was filled with boxes. The boxes had stereo equipment, printers, computers, tools, speakers, and lots of car parts. Now, they opened his gun safe and found numerous guns and ammunition as well. And all of his weapons were confiscated. And one was the .454 revolver, like the one stolen from Carl Dutcher. Turned out to be his.
Uh-huh. So Jonathan Matheny was interviewed with his mother, and he refused to answer any questions. He denied any affiliation with the O.A.R.A. or Simon, or any knowledge of the Dutcher murders.
So he seems a lot more prepared for dealing with the police than the other ones.
Yeah, he's going to lawyer up.
Yeah.
But despite his denials, John was arrested and put in detention awaiting formal charges.
Well, on his ride to the station, Simon was just chatting happily with the police. Then Glenn Urban was questioned because he had also been named as a member of the O.A.R.A. So Simon was 19 and he was arrested in the Springs on April 26, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder as well as a long list of other offenses. Glenn Urban was 18 and he was arrested on the same day as an accessory for conspiring to create an alibi for Isaac and John and for destroying the murder weapons. So what he had done with the tools that he had was actually cut up the knife and gun and put the pieces in paint cans and gotten rid of them. Now, no evidence surfaced that suggested that he knew about the murders until after they were completed. So he eventually told investigators that he too was working under orders from Simon and he cooperated with police. Simon Sue was accused of masterminding this whole thing. Isaac told investigators and his parents that the O.A.R.A. training included learning to take apart and put together semi-automatic and automatic weapons. Some weeks the boys practiced stealth guerrilla tactics. Sometimes they shot guns. On more than one occasion they watched videotapes showing one person killing another by slicing his throat. One time Isaac said he was forced to gorge on chocolate cupcakes until he vomited, and then he had to eat his own vomit.
In the weeks that followed the arrests, law enforcement agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the CBI, the Park County Sheriff's Office, and the Colorado Springs Police Department focused their attention on the guns found in the Sioux houses. They also looked at any possible connection to the Dutcher crimes or other criminal activity by Keith Sioux, Simon's father, and at the rumor of ties to Guyana.
Right, but prosecution attorneys didn't present any evidence in court supporting Simon's claims of serving a political faction in Guyana. So it seems like this was all kind of in Simon's head. Just a bored kid creating some alternate universe.
Well, I don't know about necessarily bored, but damaged in some way.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Well, based on Isaac's confession, prosecutors got guilty pleas out of all of the suspects eventually. And Simon was sentenced to 53 years in prison. John received 68 years. Glenn Urban, who admitted to destroying the weapons used in the killings, accepted a plea bargain in exchange for his testimony against the others, and he was sentenced to a 1-year work release sentence. Now, I'd read in a couple different places that it was 2 years or 1 year, so I'm not sure which, but he absolutely got a much shorter sentence than the others. Much shorter. Isaac Grimes was sentenced to 60 years in prison. So it's interesting about Tony's mom.
Yeah, she forgave Isaac, and she even offered to testify to get his sentence reduced, which she did, and his sentence was reduced from 60 years to 50, but then this reduction was overturned.
Well, after that, his mom said that he was in a really bad place mentally, and he stopped talking to his mother a short time after that. Donna Grimes and Jenny Vandresser became friendly with each other, and they wrote back and forth after Jenny was able to forgive Isaac. Now, one thing about Jenny is after Tony died, she was drunk driving and killed someone and was prosecuted and convicted of vehicular homicide, so she spent 10 years in prison.
Wow.
Yeah, so talk about tragedy in a family.
I guess.
So I also looked up some stuff on age and circumstances when teens are charged as adults. I found an online book called The Criminal Law Handbook. It had a lot on that. So some juvenile cases do get transferred to adult criminal court through a process that they call a waiver when a judge waives the protections that juvenile court provides to a defendant. So usually juvenile cases that are subject to waiver involve serious crimes like this, or minors who've been in trouble repeatedly. Although being tried in an adult court gives a juvenile more constitutional protections, it has a lot of disadvantages, including the potential for a much longer sentence, and being in an adult correctional facility. In most states, a juvenile offender must be at least 16 to be eligible for waiver to adult court, but in a number of states, minors as young as 13 could be subjected to waiver petition. And we've seen this in cases that we've researched.
We certainly have.
A few states allow children of any age to be tried as adults for certain types of crimes like homicide. And the current trend among states is to lower the minimum age of eligibility for waiver into adult court. So that's pretty scary to me. And it's part of the public perception that juvenile crime is on the rise and offenders are getting younger. But I just don't understand it. I think if you're a juvenile, you're a juvenile. And how can a 13-year-old be tried as an adult?
It's a tough question.
Right. So some of the factors. These are some of the factors that lead to a court granting a waiver petition. And some of them are pretty obvious that we know. One would be a juvenile is charged with a serious offense. Also, if a juvenile has a lengthy juvenile record, or if the minor is older, like a 17-year-old. If past rehab efforts for the juvenile have failed. Also, if youth services would have to work with the juvenile offender for a long time. And there are some states that have automatic transfer laws that require juvenile cases to be transferred to adult criminal court if the following is true. The offender is 16 or older, and the charges are serious or violent, such as rape or murder.
So juveniles subject to an automatic transfer can still request a transfer hearing in juvenile court. And during that hearing, which is called a reverse waiver or reverse transfer hearing, the juvenile, through an attorney, has the burden of convincing the judge to reverse the automatic transfer and allow the juvenile to be tried in juvenile court.
And I don't think that's successful a lot of the time.
No. I mean, if you just look at the trend, it's unlikely that it's going to be successful very often. So usually juveniles and their attorneys fight to keep a case in juvenile court. But there are also advantages, as you said, Jill, to being tried in adult criminal court. So here are some of the pros and cons for juveniles whose cases are waived to adult court. So advantage of it in adult criminal court. Minors have the right to a jury trial in adult court. Most states do not provide a right to a jury in juvenile court. So there's one advantage.
Yeah, to me that's not an advantage, because as I've said, I would not want a jury. I'd rather have the judge decide.
Yeah, but then there's a perception that juries in adult court may be more sympathetic to a minor.
Maybe.
And then there's some jurisdictions where dockets and jails are crowded, and the court may be inclined to dispose of the juvenile's case more quickly and impose a lighter sentence.
Okay, but I think there are more disadvantages to adult criminal court for a juvenile, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the more severe sentences you can get.
You're way more likely to have that.
And judges in adult court don't have this wide range of punishment and treatment options that they can give to juveniles, like curfew or counseling. And you're getting into hard jail time here.
You are.
And the juvenile would have to serve time in an adult jail or prison, which is horrible. Although I guess a lot of juvenile detention centers are pretty much just as bad. But then you have the conviction in adult criminal court, which carries more social stigma. It stays with you forever. And adult criminal courts are harder to seal than juvenile court records. So it's going to be available to the public. Everyone's going to know. So most of the information we got on this case of Simon Sue and Isaac Grimes and Glenn Urban and John Matheny came from articles in the Denver Post archives. There was also a book written by journalist Catherine Eastburn that was titled Simon Says, gave us a lot of information. So before we begin our feedback segment, I'd just like to remind our listeners that we do have podcast episodes that we make exclusively for our Team Tie Grabber members, which are some of our favorite people in the world. If you'd like to get a gift sent to you from us, help with the costs of podcasting, and get an extra TCB episode every month, please visit our website, tiegrabber.com, and join Team Tie Grabber. Right now, there are over 20 members-only episodes available for your binging pleasure. And other ways to help us out are to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, follow us on Instagram or Twitter, or participate in our True Crime Brewery fan discussions page on Facebook. And of course, we always encourage feedback either by voicemail, email, direct message on Facebook, Twitter, however you can get a hold of us.
We're easy.
Absolutely.
This episode of True Crime Brewery is sponsored by ADT. ADT can design and install a smart home just for you, backed by 24/7 protection. This can include doorman service, which is an ADT automation that unlocks the door for package deliveries, friends, or your kids. Or it can include turn-down service that arms your system, locks your doors, and turns down your lights and thermostat at bedtime. This is all controlled from the ADT app or by the sound of your voice. Just visit adt.com/smart to learn more about how ADT can design and install a secure smart home just for you.
All right, let's go ahead with feedback.
Okay, we've got a voicemail to lead us off. This is from Heather in North Carolina, and she has a case suggestion.
Wonderful. Here we go. Let's hear what Heather has to say.
Hello, Jill and Dick. This is Heather from Hickory, North Carolina, and I finally got up the courage to call and leave you a voicemail. I just wanted to let you know how much I love True Crime Brewery. I am Team Tie Grabber all the way, and I found y'all when I was looking up information on the Zara Baker case, since I live about 2 miles from the house that Zara lived in before she was brutally murdered, and I think that y'all handled that case exceptionally well. Zara Baker has become our adopted child here in Hickory, North Carolina. We have a park that we built for her that's handicap accessible. But anyway, I was calling to refer a case that also happened in North Carolina. And I don't know if y'all heard about it. It's about Ray Caruth. He was a Carolina Panther, and he was convicted of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, shooting into an occupied vehicle, and using an instrument to destroy an unborn child. His on and off again girlfriend, Shreeka Adams, was shot on November the 16th, 1999, when she was 8 months pregnant. She was following Caruth home from a date, and Caruth stopped in front of her, which made her stop, and a car pulled up beside of her, and someone shot her 4 times, and she called 911 and conveyed that she was following Caruth and that she was 8 months pregnant. She was found, taken to the hospital, fell into a coma, and her son, Chancellor, was delivered by emergency C-section. He had been deprived of oxygen for 70 minutes, which caused him extensive brain damage and cerebral palsy. And Caruth was then arrested, let out on $3 million bail with the condition that if Shreeka or Chancellor died, that he would turn himself in. Well, Shreeka passed away on December the 14th of 1999, and Caruth fled to Tennessee, where he was found in the trunk of a car in a motel parking lot. And he was defended by David Rudolph, the one who defended Michael Peterson in the staircase murder. And as I said, he was found guilty. He was sentenced to 18 to 24 years in prison, and he's set to be released here shortly on October the 18th. And he's remained pretty silent through this whole ordeal, but in February, he sent a 15-page letter to WBTV, which is a news station in Charlotte, directed towards Shreeka's mother and Chancellor. And you can look all this stuff up on YouTube. The letter was unbelievable and sarcastic. And the court trial was on Court TV, and Van Brett Watkins, who was the shooter, he really gave David Rudolph a really hard time. So I think you need to look that up on YouTube, and if this is a case y'all want to do, I think it would be a great one. And I love y'all, and keep doing the good work. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. What a lovely accent. I love it. So, yeah, I don't think that we have much more to say on the case right now because she went into some good detail there.
Heather gave a very good synopsis.
Yeah, so definitely we will look into that.
Yeah, I think we probably ought to do that case.
Okay.
Just because it's pretty famous. And it's always nice to do professional athletes.
You think so? Okay.
But yeah, that was a pretty famous case. I think it'd be an interesting one to do.
Okay. Sounds good.
So write that down.
I've got it.
Okay. Now that's our only voicemail for this week. I have some non-voicemails.
Okay, but let's get some voicemails coming if anyone wants to. Don't be shy.
Don't be shy.
Because we do love our voicemails.
Be like Heather and work up your courage.
That's right.
So I have a case suggestion from Anthony C. Please read this. I just heard of the case about Caitlin Conley, this very pretty young girl who was slowly being dumped by her boyfriend, so she poisoned her boyfriend's mother and watched her die slowly for 2 days, then puts the poison in her boyfriend's car, writes a note to the police pointing a finger at her boyfriend anonymously. So the police investigate him and his father for suspicion of killing the mother and find out ultimately that she had planted all the evidence and poisoned her boyfriend earlier in the year.
This sounds like a Lifetime movie I saw. That's crazy.
She's twisted, but very pretty, and she almost got away with it.
Well, we know being pretty helps.
Well,
Being
sure,
a woman helps.
if you're a suspect.
Right. Justice is not blind as it should be.
So, just a quickie about this.
Yeah, give me a little summary of what this case is about.
Caitlin Conley is a 24-year-old woman who was convicted last November of first-degree manslaughter in the death of Marie Yoder. Caitlin was sentenced to 23 years in prison, according to media reports. She faced a minimum of 5 years and a maximum of 25 years in prison. Marie Yoder, 60 years old, was Conley's boss and the mother of Conley's ex-boyfriend, Adam. She was initially charged with second-degree murder and accused of poisoning Marie Yoder using colchicine.
Well, gee, why is that second degree? I'd like to know.
Her first trial ended in a hung jury in May of 2017. So I don't know why it was only second degree, because it was premeditated, wasn't it?
Well, I think poisoning is very premeditated,
Right.
isn't it? Yeah. All right, we'll look into that one too.
It's an interesting one. And for the nerds out there, colchicine is a medicine that's used to treat gout, and it is fairly toxic.
Okay, the next email is from Cranky B. And Cranky B writes, can you talk about these two cases sometime? Marie Fahey, a woman who was murdered in Delaware. Selena Quintanilla Perez, the very famous singer who was tragically murdered in Texas. I so enjoy listening to your show, and I would like to hear your take on these cases. Thanks. All right, so these cases, we have Thomas Joseph Capano, who was a disbarred American lawyer and former Delaware Deputy Attorney General, who was convicted in the 1996 murder of Marie Fahey, his former lover. Marie, the scheduling secretary for Governor Carper, became involved with the married Capano in 1994. And in September 1995, while still involved with him, she began a relationship with a man named Michael Scanlon. She was last seen alive on Tuesday, June 27, 1996, when she went to dinner with Capano in Philadelphia. Fahey's family reported her missing on June 30th, and after an extensive investigation into her disappearance, the FBI joined in the investigation in July 1996. And a federal grand jury heard evidence for over a year. Capano, the last known person to have seen her alive, was the primary suspect, and he was arrested for her murder in November of 1997. That was over 16 months after her disappearance. But her body was never found, and prosecutors were unable to establish the cause or manner of her death. Prosecutors did allege that Capano murdered Fahey at the house he rented, and with the assistance of his brother Jerry, dumped her body in the Atlantic Ocean. Jerry Capano owned a boat, and when it was sold, its 2 anchors were missing. So did he use them to weigh down a body? On November 8, 1997, Jerry was interviewed by detectives and told them that Thomas had borrowed the boat and admitted that he had murdered someone who was attempting to extort him. They went to Stone Harbor, New Jersey with a large cooler that contained Fahey's body, sailed 62 miles out to sea and pushed the cooler overboard. Gary told police that Thomas shot the cooler in order to sink it, but that the cooler remained afloat in the water. Thomas then retrieved it, removed the body, wrapped the anchor around it. Thomas also asked Gary to help dispose of a blood-stained sofa and carpet into a dumpster, which was managed by a third brother, Lewis. Thomas instructed Lewis to empty the dumpsters outside of their regular schedule, and the empty cooler was found on July 4, 1996 by a local fisherman. Investigators didn't have a murder weapon or a body, nor any evidence that Capano had purchased a gun. However, Capano's mistress, Debbie McIntyre, had bought a gun and, when questioned by investigators, admitted to supplying the weapon to Capano. So this was a highly publicized case that went to trial in 1998 and lasted 12 weeks. The defense claimed that McIntyre had burst into Capano's room and, in a jealous rage upon seeing him and Fahey engaged in intimacy, had threatened to shoot herself. And as Capano and McIntyre were wrestling for the gun, it fired, accidentally killing Fahey.
It's kind of a stretch.
It is, yeah. That's very unlikely. So on January 17, 1999, the jury convicted Capano of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. In January 2006, the Delaware Supreme Court affirmed his conviction, but remanded the case for sentencing because the death penalty was imposed by a non-unanimous jury verdict. So in February of that year, the state abandoned its efforts to seek capital punishment and opted to leave him in prison for life without parole. So this next case, Selena Quintanilla Perez, was an American singer, songwriter, spokesperson, model, actress, and fashion designer. Called the Queen of Tejano music, her contributions to music and fashion made her one of the most celebrated Mexican-American entertainers of the late 20th century. Billboard magazine named her the top-selling Latin artist of the 1990s. So media outlets called her the Tejano Madonna for her clothing choices. And she also ranks among the most influential Latin artists of all time and is credited for catapulting the music genre into the mainstream market. She was the youngest child, and she debuted on the music scene in 1980 as a member of the band Selena y los Dinos, which also included her elder siblings. She began recording professionally in 1982. So aside from music, she was also active in her community and donated her time to civic causes. Coca-Cola appointed her its spokesperson in Texas, and she became a sex icon. She was often criticized for wearing suggestive outfits in light of her comments about being a role model for young women. On March 31, 1995, she was shot and killed by Yolanda Saldivar, her friend and former manager of her Selena etc. boutiques. Saldivar was cornered by police when she attempted to flee and threatened to kill herself, but was convinced to give herself up and was sentenced to life in prison with a possible parole after 30 years. 2 weeks later, George W. Bush, governor of Texas at the time, declared Selena's birthday Selena Day in Texas. So this is the person who was played by Jennifer Lopez in 1997, yeah, Selena.
Didn't we see that movie?
We might have a long time ago.
Yeah.
But I didn't really remember the story behind it.
And she was a pretty famous person.
Yeah, and young.
And young.
Yeah. Okay, well that might be worth covering, huh?
Could be.
Well, why don't you read the email, the next one from Danielle?
Danielle P. has a case suggestion. Hello, Jill and Dick. My name is Danielle, and I am a massive fan of your channel.
Thanks, Danielle.
Here's a submission idea for an upcoming episode. Nicholas Kunzelman and Stephanie Hart Grizel had survived the Columbine massacre, yet were murdered not even a year after the tragedy.
Wow, I'm shocked. I've never heard of this.
We haven't. This incident was left nearly completely out of the media and has many interesting and obscure details. Thank you for always providing a fascinating and well-documented podcast. Always looking forward to the next shocking story.
So what have you found out about this case, Dick?
So I was looking around, trying to find some info, and I found some stuff on America's Most Wanted fan page. The case had been aired on America's Most Wanted in March of 2001. A year earlier, the bodies of 16-year-old Stephanie Hart and 15-year-old Nicholas Kunzelman had been found in a Subway sandwich shop in Jefferson County, Colorado. Now, Stephanie had come around midnight the previous night to pick up Nicholas, where he was working towards the end of his shift.
And he was her boyfriend, huh?
He was her boyfriend. She had snuck out of her home and came to get him. Now, witnesses have described a white male aged 16 to 18 years leaving the restaurant through the back door after midnight. He's never been identified. There are a few possible motives identified in this case. First is that the murders were drug-related, as the area has been prone to drug activity. Second could be there was a case of jealousy. And the third is that whoever's responsible for the crime committed it because the Subway restaurant was a few blocks from Columbine. Now, on this
so what, is like a copycat type of thing?
Yeah.
All right.
But they, at the same time, the people writing on this fan page said that they do not want conspiracy theorists coming on here and saying that the murders were connected to the Columbine High School massacre.
But there were a lot of conspiracy theories for that, I guess.
Oh, there were. If you're going by the witnesses that saw this person leaving the restaurant, all three possibilities could make sense. There also could have been a robbery gone wrong. Something else was interesting. There was a lawsuit filed against the owner of the Subway shop that he might have been turning his back to drug dealing that was going on there.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the lawyers on behalf of Stephanie's mother said that Nicholas may have been using marijuana at the time of the murders. So there's some credence to the drug-related theory. But it's an interesting thing. I know that the inclination would be to say, well, it must be somehow related to the Columbine massacre, but it's unlikely.
Yeah, just an awful coincidence?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm surprised I'd never heard about that. I think it's correct in saying that it really didn't get as much media attention as you would expect. Unless I'm the only one that missed this.
I'm the one that missed it too.
Okay, so there's at least the two of us.
Two of us that missed it.
Okay.
We've got people that listen to us and have all sorts of ideas about interesting cases.
We do.
And they keep coming up with these things.
Right.
Okay, you're next.
Okay, so a case suggestion from Cheryl Ann. Hi, Jill and Dick. I'm a new but instantly loyal fan of your podcast. Actually, yours is the only true crime podcast I listen to. I enjoy the lively banter between the two of you. You have found a great balance with Jill playing devil's advocate and Dick representing the rest of us. What? Is that true?
Of course.
Oh, okay. I thought I was just voicing my opinions, but okay.
Well, this is Cheryl Ann's take on things.
Sure. Both views are thought-provoking, she says, intelligent and highly entertaining. Okay, there. She's won me back.
Okay. Phew.
I have two case suggestions I think you might like. Mick and Marie Philpott are serving time for arson and murder in Devon, England. That is all I can say here, as there's not enough room to tell more, and theirs is a story you really have to feel to believe. Yes, feel. We haven't done anything in England lately.
We haven't, and when you get into this case, I think that's something that's going to tweak you a little bit, and you want to do it.
Okay. Oh, yeah, so you have some notes here on it for me.
I do.
Okay. The second case is Leonard Lake and sidekick Charles, and these two journey to a level of depravity that's hard to describe in words, from theft to murder and absolutely everything in between. Thank you both for all the work that goes into your podcast, and I look forward to more. So Michael Mick Philpott, and I think we have talked about him before actually, was a British father who was found guilty of causing the deaths of 6 of his children by arson in 2012. And Philpott, who had made several media appearances because of his benefits-funded lifestyle, which in the U.S. we would call that welfare, and polyamorous relationships, was sentenced to life imprisonment for their manslaughter. He had first come to prominence in the British media as a result of his large family because he had fathered 17 children by various women, and he'd been relying on state benefits. In May 2012, a fire killed 6 of his children, one of whom he had not fathered, at his home in Allenton, Derby. In April 2013, following an 8-week trial, he and his wife Marie, together with their friend Paul Mosley, were found guilty of manslaughter. He was given a life sentence with a minimum term of 15 years imprisonment. Psychologist Glenn Wilson described Philpott as clinically a psychopath and exhibitionist with antisocial personality disorder.
Yeah, I think we've heard of this.
Someone's recommended this a long time ago, and I think that we said we were going to look it up, and maybe we failed to do that.
It's quite possible. But
so you've got your pad there. Put that down. Philpott.
I put it down.
Because I remember reading a little bit about it, and that is an extraordinary case. So the next one is Leonard Thomas Lake. also known as Leonard Hill, and by a variety of other aliases. And he was an American serial killer during the mid-1980s. He and accomplice Charles Ng raped, tortured, and murdered an estimated 11 to 25 victims at a remote cabin in Calaveras County, California, in the Sierra Nevada foothills 150 miles east of San Francisco. After his arrest in 1985 on illegal weapons, auto theft, and fraud charges, Lake swallowed cyanide pills that he had sewn into his clothing, and he died 4 days later. Human remains, videotapes, and journals found at the cabin later confirmed Ng's involvement and were used to convict him on 11 counts of capital murder. Those are two very good cases, and I know Philpott's been recommended before, so we should definitely fit that in somewhere.
Okay. I promise we'll look up some stuff on Lake.
Thank you, Cheryl Ann. Those are great suggestions.
Okay. Then we have a comment from Jackie A. on the Madeleine McCann disappearance.
Okay, and I'm just going to assume everyone knows about that because it's such a well-known case.
Right. So Jackie A. says, I read something creepy. John Podesta and his creepy brother, both suspected child predators with ties to child trafficking, were staying within a few blocks of the McCanns at the time Madeleine went missing. And the sketch of the two men that were people of interest or whatever looks exactly like them. Google it.
Okay, I will.
All right. So Madeleine McCann was the little girl who disappeared in 2007 from a resort in Portugal where she and her parents were staying.
And a lot of people have accused her parents.
Right. Now in 2013, so this is several years after Maddie's disappearance, electronically generated sketches purportedly resemble John Podesta and his brother. Now Podesta was Clinton's chief of staff from 1998 to 2001. So he's kind of a big shot.
And they were in the area?
Well, so here's some things to consider.
Okay.
So the images that were generated were actually coming from a sketch of just one person. They produced different images of how he might look, but it was one person. So it's of a person who may have been a witness to the crime, not a suspect. So the fact, and certainly if you look at Podesta and his brother, they resemble the two pictures.
Well, that's sketchy, no pun intended.
Right. But the sketches came from just one drawing.
Sure, I gotcha.
Okay, so that's one thing. So Podesta has not been charged or convicted of any child molestation.
So why is he known as a pedophile?
He's not.
So who's saying he's a pedophile?
Well, the suspicion is. And he does know Dennis Hastert, who is a pedophile.
Okay, I got it.
And then despite trying to find evidence for him being in Portugal, there isn't any evidence that he was actually there at the time Madeleine went missing. So it sounds more interesting, I think, than it turned out, or at least what I could uncover.
So I don't think we mentioned that at all in our episode we did on it, did we? But I do remember some sketches.
But this was after the fact. Yeah, they had some sketches of a person of interest as a
You're
witness.
so much better at remembering these old cases. I finished one and it's like whoosh out of my brain. Okay. So that's something to keep in mind, exactly. I am going to Google it because I'm interested, even though you already Googled it.
Well, look it up.
All right. Thanks, Jackie. So we have another case suggestion from Kate. Hi, guys. Great job as always. I'd love to hear you do an episode on Diane Schuler.
Well, guess what, Kate? We're going to.
Yes, that was recommended several times. Dick's really into it. He's watched the documentary. He's looking up stuff. He's getting alcohol levels and drugs, and this is a big one for him. So we definitely are doing that. Do we have it scheduled? Is it in December?
Yes, I think it's early December that we have it scheduled for.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been fascinated with it ever since watching the documentary.
Yeah, and speaking of December, I'm really looking for suggestions on what we should do for Christmas. Christmas is on a Tuesday this year, so I thought I'd like to do something a little special. So if anyone has any good ideas on that, please call and leave us a voicemail letting us know.
There you are.
Or an email, but we prefer a voicemail.
We'll take whatever.
We'll take whatever.
Okay, you get this one from Daniel S.
All right, Daniel has a case suggestion. He says, I've never heard this case covered anywhere, and I wanted to see if you would cover it. Tabitha Brewer and Nick Travis were people I went to high school with. In my senior year, 1998, they disappeared. He was found dead, but she was never found. Brandon Howell was charged and not convicted. The alleged killer has been mentioned in more recent news stories because he went on to be a lifelong criminal. So there's a lot of material here. Please cover this and review a Boulevard beer. Thank you.
Well,
thanks, Daniel. And Daniel has given us Boulevard beers in the past.
I have a bunch of Boulevard beers. So let's look more into it. Tell me about it, and I'll make sure I review a Boulevard beer.
So Tabitha Brewer and Nicholas Travis were last seen outside their father's residence in Shawnee, Kansas on April 27, 1998. Her purse was later found in a dumpster at 55th and Paseo Boulevard in Kansas City, Missouri. Brandon Howell was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder stemming from the deaths of Nicholas Travis and Tabitha Brewer. The couple were last seen with the suspect leaving Brewer's home on April 27, 1998. Travis's body was found in the backyard of a Kansas City, Missouri duplex on August 12th of that year. The suspects and Travis had both worked there. Brewer's body has never been found. 3 witnesses told authorities that the suspect had confessed to killing the couple or had discussed a plan to kill them. The motive may have been a $40,000 settlement that Brewer had received after a car accident, although she was unable to access the money because it was in a trust fund. The suspect was found not guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Nick, Travis, and Tabitha Brewer in 2009. So Howell spent time in prison for a 1999 home invasion. He was also charged with first-degree murder in a triple homicide that occurred in 2014, and he was convicted of the murders and sentenced to death.
So as Daniel says, he is kind of a career criminal.
A violent career criminal, yeah.
Yeah. So home invasion in 1999. This was like maybe a year or so after the disappearance of Tabitha Brewer and Nicholas Travis.
Yeah.
Because it took about 10 years for that trial to take place.
So the only good part about this is he's not free.
No, he was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. But it's fascinating.
Well, Daniel, I know that Dick loves the Boulevard beers, so we probably will be covering this sometime in the future.
We more than likely will. And not just for the opportunity to review a Boulevard beer. And I think the biggest thing is here's this guy who probably is guilty of their killings, who managed to get acquitted, and then went on to kill 3 other people.
Well, I would imagine people who kill more than once probably don't get caught for all of them, right? I mean, usually when they get a serial killer into prison, they're convicted for, I don't know how many, but it'll turn out like they're convicted for 5 or 6 murders, but the FBI will estimate that they've killed 40 or something like that. You know? That seems common. Yeah,
they just don't know where all the bodies are.
Sure. Thank you, Daniel, and everyone else for your feedback. We do really appreciate it. I know that a lot of people put time and effort into coming up with these cases. So if it takes us a while to get them out, just remember that we do have them in mind.
Absolutely.
And we do appreciate them.
And again, I think it's really great that so many of our listeners take the time to give us these suggestions.
I'm impressed by it, I have to say.
Yeah.
So how are you feeling?
Feeling pretty good.
Good.
I didn't slur too many words, did I?
No, and the foot's not throbbing?
No, foot feels pretty good. So whatever that non-narcotic pain reliever is, it worked pretty well.
Yes. Well, I'm going to give the bartender a True Crime Brewery t-shirt because he's kept you in fresh ice all this time.
He has.
And I
He's
really
been
think...
very solicitous of me.
You know, we do this True Crime Brewery and there's so many awful people, but when I'm out and about in the world, most people are really super nice.
Well, sure.
Most people are good. I mean, sometimes I feel like I need to be reminded of that.
Well, yeah, because you get immersed in this stuff and you think, oh, I'm just reading about the dark side of everybody. So people are shit. But most of us aren't.
No, most of them are really nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you for the ice. The beer is flowing and the foot is great.
Okay, that's very good.
All right, let's go.
All right, well, thank you everyone for listening, and we will talk to you next time at The Quiet End.
The Quiet End. Save a seat.
Bye-bye.
Bye.